Hello there, fellow time travelers. My name is Miss Ellie Fitzgerald, and I was on a ship on my way to America when I found this portal and it opened up and I crossed, and then I found myself in 2023 here at the Bel Air Public Library. The year was 1892, so this looks very confusing. Can you help me find my way back by reading a story with me today? Great. So I found this book, and the only way I can get back to 1892 is if I read a story to you, and the portal will reopen and I can get back to 1892. So the story I found is a lot like my story and my great-great-grandparents who came from Ireland. This story is called Dreaming of America by Eve Bunting. It is a story about Ellis Island. The SS Nevada steamed out of the harbor and into the open seas. Her decks were a bustle with men, women, and children, some still dragging their trunks and boxes. Annie Moore and her brothers, Anthony and little Philip, stood at the railing watching Ireland disappear into the mist. Gone, Annie thought. The word had the awfulest, loneliest sound. Just last night she'd been dancing at the wake her friends had given for the leaving. There'd been sad farewells, but there'd been music and singing and laughter too. And now her friends were lost to her forever. Will we be back, Annie? Philip asked. Annie tightened her arms around her two little brothers. I hope so. Bad thoughts crowded into her mind. What if their mother and father weren't there to meet them when they landed in America? It was 3 years now since they'd seen their parents. For 3 years, Annie and Philip, now Anthony, had lived with Auntie and Uncle in the wee warm house in Cork that was truly home. Would she ever see it again? Would she ever see them again? She'd never forget the heartbreak in their faces as they'd said their last goodbyes. That very morning, Annie swallowed the tears that came with the memories. Annie, Philip touched her hand and turned his face up to hers. I know that what we can do, Annie. We can make a lot of money in America and send tickets for Auntie and Uncle the way Mammy and Daddy sent them for us. A man leaning on the rail next to Philip asked, Are you traveling alone? No, I've got our Annie and Anthony, Philip said. The man smiled. I meant without parents. They're waiting for us in America, Annie told him. She liked the look of him. He was older than her uncle, small as a bird in his brown tweed jacket, that perched on the point of his Adam's apple. He took off his hat. I am Victor Kirschenblatt from Russia. I boarded this ship at Liverpool. Annie bobbed her head. We're pleased to meet you, Mr. Kirschenblatt. Call me Mr. Victor, please. Will be easier. They shook hands, the boys too. The Nevada gave a lurch as a swell hit it, and Anthony held on to Annie's arm. There's no land behind us anymore, he said in a scared voice, and none in front. Mr. Victor said, just water and promise of America. They faced the ship's bow as it plowed and bored into the gray ocean. Annie shivered. Her new suit was not warm, and the boots Auntie had bought for her were too thin. She pulled her short jacket close about her. May we ask why you are going to America, Mr. Victor? I have son in Philadelphia. He shrugged. It is also very dangerous to be Jew in Russia. Can you teach us Russian? Anthony asked. Da, he smiled. That means yes. Perhaps a few words. You would like? Da, Anthony said. Annie hugged her arms around herself. 'Tis ever so cold. I should take my brothers below. We will meet again, Mr. Victor said. Annie held tight to her brother's hands as they leaned against the wind that whistled along the deck. She pushed open a door to the stairs, and they made their way down, 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 past several decks lined with cabin doors. Anthony clutched at Annie's arm. Are we below the ocean, Annie? We are. Isn't it exciting? Can the water not get in? Not at all. No more than the rain could get in our house at our home. She was checking the numbers on each cabin against the label they'd been given as they boarded. Here we are. You open the door, Philip. They stood staring into the cabin. Isn't this the nice wee room now? Annie asked shakily. Cozy, just for the three of us. In truth, it wasn't cozy, and not that nice either. There were no windows in their cabin. The only furniture was a washstand with a mirror over it and 3 iron beds, 2 of them stacked one on top of the other. Annie longed for the poppy wallpaper in their little attic bedroom at home. She longed too for the smell of the mothballs Auntie kept in their wardrobe. She'd never thought she'd miss the smell of mothballs. Can I have the bed on top, Philip? Philip asked, beginning to monkey climb. Annie pulled him back. You may not. I don't want you falling on your head. I'll be up there and you'll be below me. Anthony will have the bed against the wall. What's that noise? Little Philip held his hands over his ears. It's the big engines that make the ship go, Annie shouted. I think we're right on top of them. In the corridor outside, babies cried, trunks scratched along the floor. A voice called, Bridget? And someone answered, Save us all. We'll be suffocating down here. 'Tis like being in a coffin. A cabin door slammed. Their bag with the 3rd class label was sitting by the door. Beside it was the brown paper parcel Auntie had handed them before they left. For Christmas, she'd whispered, a wee bit of home and a little something inside for your birthday, too. A kushla. You can open it on the big ship the day before you become 15. She hugged Annie tight. And think of us, darling. I'll think of you always, Annie had said, speaking through the thickness of her throat. Always. She opened the suitcase now and removed the 2 pictures she'd taken off the wall of their bedroom. There'd been white patches on the poppy wallpaper where they'd hung for so long. One was of their mother and father. The other was of Auntie and Uncle. She set them on the washstand. There, she said, now we'll not be so lonesome. Philip started to cry. I want to go home, he sobbed. Annie rocked him against her. It'll be all right. She murmured, aren't we going to our new home in America? Mr. Victor was their special companion during the voyage. I take you under my feathers, he told Anthony. And Anthony giggled. You mean wing, he said. Mr. Victor groaned. I try hard to not to make mistake. You speak grand, Annie said. What is Russian for friend? The word in English is good. Mr. Victor smiled. I like that you use it. He sat next to them at the big wooden table where they ate their food. There were plenty of potatoes and bread. One night there was stew. Not like Auntie makes, Anthony spat a knot of gristle into his hand. After the third day, it didn't matter what food they got, none of them were eating. A great storm had blown up, and the ship rolled and lurched. The seas battered and smashed across its deck. Nobody could go outside, and the smell of sick was everywhere. The ocean heaved, the ship heaved, and every stomach aboard heaved with it. In the cabin, there was no escape from the banging of the engines. It pounded in their ears day and night. They were so close to the bow, they could feel every thump and slurp of the ship meeting the waves. Are we going to die, Annie? Little Philip's face was the pale green of the underside of a leaf. No, Akushla, we're safe as can be. She wiped sweat from his forehead. What if little Philip died here, in the middle of this awful ocean? It'll pass, lovely, it will, Anthony groaned. Night and day she watched over them, dragging herself from her top bed to hold them and to play. Mr. Victor brought drinking water to their cabin. Once he brought a bowl of soup big enough for the three of them. Where did you get it? Annie asked. I have made a friend of Steward in first class, Mr. Victor said. He is also Russian. He tells me that even the rich are not eating in this storm. We are under his feathers, Annie thought, and we are safer when they are covering us. Then one day the storm was over, and they were still alive. Up on deck, they breathed in the clean, gusty air. Philip lifted his face to the sky and said, Blessings, blessings, blessings. Annie and Anthony laughed. That was what Auntie said when she got a day without rain to dry washing on the clothesline. The same day it was Christmas, but it didn't seem real. Where was the good Christmas smell of the goose cooking and the plum pudding simmering on the fire? Where were the colored paper chains hanging from the ceiling and the friends coming to the door? How could this ever be Christmas? But it was, and they made the best of it. Down in their cabin, the boys sat on Anthony's bed, one on each side of Annie, and she untied the string on Auntie's parcel. On top was a letter. Dear children, it began. My dear children, by now your uncle and I will know how much we miss you. You are like our own, and you always will be. God keep you safe. Happy Christmas. There was a scarf for each of them, a red one for Anthony, yellow for Philip, and blue for Annie. When did she ever knit these? Annie asked. I didn't see her making them. Philip pulled aside the rest of the paper. There's more. Wrapped in cloth were 3 mince pies, plump with currants and raisins. I want my auntie, Philip wailed, rubbing his eyes. Now, isn't it the grand thing that we're well enough to eat what she sent? Take a bite, Philip, and enjoy your Christmas. Aren't you going to have yours, Annie? I'm keeping it for Mr. Victor, Annie said. I have nothing else for him. Anthony held out his pie. Here, have a bite of mine. And take a bite of mine, Philip added. But only a wee bite, Annie. You are dear boys. Annie held each taste in her mouth for as long as she could before swallowing. Never was a mince pie so good. She picked up a juicy currant that had fallen on the blanket and popped it in her mouth. The last little twist of paper was so small they almost missed it. For Annie, it said, Happy 15th birthday. Little Philip bounced on the bed, making it rattle. Open it, Annie, open it. Annie slid the package under her pillow. I won't be 15 for 7 more days. Auntie said I shouldn't have it till then. Let's go now and find Mr. Victor. Put on your coats and scarves. Aren't they lovely and warm? I'm not sure if Jewish gentlemen keep Christmas. We can just tell him we wanted to share what we got from home. Anthony nodded. We can wish him a happy halfway to America day from all of us. After Christmas, the weather was fine. Sun glittered on the ocean, and at night the moon spilled a shining path that shimmered to the horizon. We could walk on it all the way back home, Anthony said. Annie felt a sharp pang at her heart, but all she said was, Then our mother and father would be terrible sad. One night there was a party in steerage, with an accordion playing music from home and from other countries far from Ireland. There were reels and polkas and jigs. Mr. Victor danced with Annie in a stiff old gentleman way that she loved. It was the day after that a seagull flew over the SS Nevada and landed on one of the masts. That means we come close to land, Mr. Victor told them. Annie shivered. Close to America and all its strangeness. On the last night of 1891, the night before Annie's 15th birthday, the engines stopped and there was silence. In the windowless cabin, there was no way to see what was happening. But when they rushed into the corridor, a steward turned them back. No steerage passengers allowed on deck, he said. Are we there? Annie asked. We are, but nobody gets off till morning, and none of you from steerage are allowed up till then. After the never-ending noise, the quiet in the cabin was almost unbearable. Anthony and Philip slept while Annie lay awake. Were their parents looking out at their ship? How would it be when they met after all this time? What would New York be like? Number 32 Monroe Street? She tried for so long to imagine it. They knew it was morning when the steward banged on their door and shouted, Get your things together, everybody up on deck. Dress yourselves extra warm now, Annie told her little brothers. Put on your woolen vests. It's colder here than in Cork. Excitement fumbled their fingers, and Annie had to help them with their buttons. Philip flung himself at her. Annie, did you forget it's your birthday? Open your present before we go. I will, but hush up. I have to get it. Annie took the curl of paper from the pocket of her suit where she'd put it the night before. She sat on Anthony's bed to open it. Anthony's eyes widened. It's Auntie's lovely ring. Annie stared down at it. The two little red hearts joined together, gleamed even in the gloom of the cabin. So often she'd seen the ring on Auntie's hand. They're not rubies, her auntie had said one time, but your uncle gave me this ring when we were courting, and it's precious above rubies to me. Now it was Annie's. Her heart was full to bursting, As she slid it on her finger, it was a perfect fit. There was another bang on the door. "Do you want to be left behind?" Not one of them looked back as they hurried from the dark mouse hole of a cabin, up the stairs, up and up, bumping their bag behind them. The outside morning was filled with wind and sunshine. The decks were crowded. Annie saw 2 other ships at anchor in the harbor. In the distance were buildings and a wharf where small boats were moored, and people who looked no bigger than blades of grass. "Is that America?" little Philip asked. "'Tis." And there was the statue. Annie dropped her bag and put her arms tight around her brother's. "There she is," she whispered, "the Statue of Liberty. Our daddy wrote about her, remember? Isn't she grand altogether?" Some of the passengers were on their knees. One man kept pointing and calling out, "Bella, Bella!" Mr. Victor had come to stand beside them. "Bella means beautiful in Italian," he said. "My son say she is truly called Liberty, enlightening the world. Is very nice, I think." Annie nodded. "She is Bella, very, very Bella." Mr. Victor pointed. "That land is Ellis Island. We will go to the building, the one flying with the big flag." As he spoke, one of the small moored boats began moving in their direction. It was strung bow to stern with red and blue bunting, and it seemed to bounce across the harbor. Water danced and feathered behind it. Annie pressed her hands against her cheeks. "Oh, look what it's called. It's the John E. Moore," Philip gasped. Is it our boat, Annie? Did Mammy and Daddy buy it for us coming?" Annie laughed. "I don't think so, wee Philip. There must be another man called Moore who is famous in America." The John E. Moore tied up next to the SS Nevada, and at once the passengers began to board the little boat that would ferry them into port. For a few minutes, the smaller boat bobbed against the bigger ship, as if waiting for a signal. And then on the distant wharf, a giant flag was lowered and raised 3 times. The John E. Moore sounded a happy toot and set off for shore. Annie held tight to her brother's hands. The cheers from the wharf got louder and closer the closer they got. "Do they always greet newcomers like this?" Annie wondered. It was remarkable. "Do you see them yet?" Anthony stood on his tiptoe. His hand in Annie's was cold as pond ice. "What will we do if Mammy and Daddy aren't here?" Little Philip buried his face in Annie's skirt. "What if we don't recognize each other?" Annie worried, but she didn't say. "They will be there," she told Philip, "and if not, you have me. Do you think I can't find 32 Moore Street? Me that has got you so far. Me that's 15. The boat nosed into the dock, and its engine stopped. Whistles whistled, bells rang, voices screamed out names. "Hans! Jasmine! Frank!" Annie faced Mr. Victor. "When we go from here, will we see you again?" "Philadelphia is not far from New York. We can arrange." He lifted Annie's hands to his lips. "One does not ever lose friend." With a squeak and a squeal, the gangplank was lowered. Mr. Victor gave Annie a little push. "Be first, Annie. First will be good." A man in an overcoat with a shawl wrapped in folds around his neck moved in front of them, close to Annie. Another man yanked at the shawl, pulling him back. "Ladies first," he said in an Irish brogue. "You step out, little lady." Annie stepped out, Anthony and Philip at her heels. The cheers were like thunder. Small American flags waved. Hats and caps flew in the air. The salty air smelled good. The smell of America. Two important-looking gentlemen in suits took her hands. "Welcome. You are the first immigrant to enter our country through Ellis Island," one of the gentlemen said. "First will be good," Mr. Victor had said. This was what he'd meant. This was why there was a big celebration. "I am Colonel Weber," the gentleman said. "What is your name?" Annie tried not to stammer. "I am Annie Moore of Cork, Ireland. These are my brothers, Anthony and Philip." She stood unsure and embarrassed, knowing everyone was watching them. All those hundreds of people pressed behind the barricades. She looked from side to side. Oh, if she could only see her parents. "We want you to accept this $10 gold piece to commemorate this important day in history," Colonel Weber said. "And it's Annie's birthday, too," little Philip piped up. An important day in history, and she was part of it. Annie stared down at the gold coin. It seemed to float in her hand, bright as sunshine. $10? That must be a fortune. "I'll never part with it, never," she whispered. "Now, if you and your brothers will come with us, we will get you registered." It was then Annie heard the shouts, so excited they rose above the noise around them. "It's little Annie and little Anthony and little Philip." "Daddy!" Annie cried. "Daddy!" She knew that voice. That was the voice that was strict when he helped her with her sums, soft when he called her his own wee love. How could she have thought she'd ever forget it? And there was her mother, pushing through to the front of the crowd, her face red with excitement, her hat and hair every which way. "Here we are, darlings. Here we are," she called. "I see them." Anthony stretched his arms toward them and then hefted up Philip so he could see too. "I remember them exactly," he whispered to Annie. "I remember Mammy's green coat with the bone buttons. I didn't know I remembered." They waved and waved. "How does it feel to be in America?" a man with a notepad asked. "Grand altogether," Annie said. She looked down at her ring with the red stones that were more precious than rubies, the two hearts, Ireland and America. Was that what her auntie had known when she gave it? "I am Annie Moore of Cork, Ireland," she thought, "and I am Annie Moore of America." And that completes our story. I see that the portal is beginning to open. So if you stop by the Belair Public Library, you will see that there is a craft available to go along with Dreaming of America. This is a pioneer journal. And all included in this kit are some papers and some paper bag and twine. So make your journals, write in them daily as if you were immigrating from a foreign country to America. And you can design your cover in any way that you would like. And then have your parents or guardians upload a photo to our Facebook page. And it looks like it's time for me to return to 1892. Thank you so much for your help today, time traveler, and we will see you next week.